If you had been there, you would have done the same thing. That's not an insult. That's the data. In 1971, 24 of the most psychologically stable, carefully screened, completely ordinary young men in America walked into a basement at Stanford University. Within 6 days, the people running the experiment had to shut it down. Not because the guards became monsters, because the guards had no idea they were becoming anything at all, and neither would you. This is the Stanford Prison Experiment, and what it actually proved will make you look at every system you're inside right now very differently. The year was 1971. A psychologist named Philip Zimbardo had one question that wouldn't leave him alone. Is evil something people are, or is it something a situation creates? He had spent years watching people do terrible things to each other and asking the same question every time. Were these people monsters before it happened, or did something turn them into monsters? To find out, he built a fake prison in the basement of the Stanford psychology department, a real hallway converted into cells, real cell doors with real locks, a closet converted into solitary confinement. He called it the Hole. He recruited 24 male college students through a newspaper ad that paid $15 a day. He screened out anyone with a history of violence, mental illness, or legal trouble. What remained was 24 young men who were, by every psychological measure available, completely normal. Then he flipped a coin. 12 of them became prisoners. 12 became guards. The prisoners were picked up from their homes by real Palo Alto police officers, handcuffed on their doorsteps in front of their neighbors, and driven to the station for booking, then transferred to the basement. The guards were given uniforms, khaki shirts and trousers, a whistle, a billy club, mirrored sunglasses, specifically chosen so the prisoners could never see their eyes. Zimbardo told the guards one thing: you have full authority to maintain order. Figure out how. He did not tell them to be cruel. He gave them the costume, the power, and the room to decide what to do with it. He expected the experiment to run 2 weeks. For the first few hours, almost nothing happened. The guards felt awkward. The prisoners felt awkward. Everyone knew this was a psychology study. Everyone knew the other side was a fellow student. The first night was quiet. Then something shifted. On the morning of day 2, the prisoners rebelled. They ripped off their prisoner numbers, barricaded themselves inside their cells, and refused to come out. The guards were not prepared for this. They had no manual, no training, no policy. What they did have was the power to make things uncomfortable. They used a fire extinguisher to blast the prisoners with cold CO2 through the cell bars. They stripped the ringleaders naked and threw them into the hole. They confiscated the other prisoners' mattresses. They forced prisoners to do push-ups, to clean toilets with their bare hands, to stand against the wall for hours. And here is the thing nobody tells you about what happened next. None of the guards were told to do any of that. They invented it. Within 36 hours, the guards had developed a system of harassment so elaborate and consistent that Zimbardo's research team assumed they must have been coordinating privately. They hadn't. Separately, without communication, 12 different young men had arrived at almost identical methods of psychological control. One guard, the prisoners called him John Wayne, became something else entirely. He had been, by all accounts, a quiet and gentle person before the experiment started. Inside the uniform, he became the cruelest guard in the study. He woke prisoners at 2 a.m. for counts. He made them repeat their prisoner numbers until they got it perfect. He marched them to the bathroom in the middle of the night in a chain, blindfolded, just to remind them that he controlled when they could relieve themselves. After the study ended, a researcher asked him why. He said he genuinely didn't know. He said it was like watching himself from outside his own body. He knew it was wrong. He kept doing it anyway. The prisoners had not expected any of this. They had signed up for a 2-week study. They assumed at some level that at any moment they could just leave. They couldn't. Within 36 hours, prisoner 8612, a young man who had come in confident, articulate, and emotionally stable, began to break down in his cell. He screamed. He cried. He tore off his uniform number. He told the guards he was having a mental breakdown and needed to get out. The guards brought him to Zimbardo, and Zimbardo, the researcher, the psychologist, the man who was supposed to be watching all of this from the outside, told him he couldn't leave. He told the prisoner that if he stayed, he could be a spy for the research team and report on the other prisoners. Zimbardo had already stopped seeing this young man as a research subject. He was seeing him as a prisoner. He only realized this later. He wrote about it afterward with a level of self-accounting that is rare in academic literature. He said that he had become the prison superintendent, not the observer, the person running the institution. The prisoner who begged to leave that first night was eventually allowed out, but not before Zimbardo told the others that he had gone crazy to try to manipulate them into staying, to frighten them into thinking they couldn't fake their way out. He was, in his own words, playing the warden. By day 4, other prisoners were beginning to fracture. One developed a full-body rash that had no physical cause. Another refused to eat. Another began screaming at the ceiling of his cell, alone, in the middle of the night. One prisoner, prisoner 416, arrived as a replacement mid-experiment and was horrified by what he saw. He decided to stage a hunger strike to protest the conditions. The guards put him in the hole and told the other prisoners that he was a troublemaker. Then they offered the others a choice. You can have your mattresses back, or 416 can come out of the hole. Not both. The prisoners chose their mattresses. They had been inside this basement for 4 days. On the 6th day, a graduate student named Christina Maslach visited the experiment to conduct interviews. She was Zimbardo's girlfriend. She walked into that basement, looked at what was happening, and walked back out to find him. She said, "What you are doing to those boys is a terrible thing." Everyone else who had visited, parents, a prison chaplain, a public defender, had accepted the reality of the situation and played their role inside it. The chaplain behaved like a chaplain visiting a real prison. The public defender behaved like a lawyer meeting real inmates. Nobody had stopped to say, "This is wrong, you need to end it." Maslach was the first outsider in 6 days to see the experiment for what it actually was. They had a fight. Zimbardo was furious. He later said he was angry at her for disrupting what he saw as important research. Then he stopped. He realized that he was doing exactly what his own experiment was proving. He had been absorbed into the role. He had become the superintendent. He had lost his outside view. He shut the study down the following morning. 6 days in, 8 days ahead of schedule. When the results came out, the world ran with the obvious reading. People are naturally cruel. Give someone power and they will abuse it. Put someone in a uniform and they become the uniform. That reading spread everywhere. Textbooks, movies, political speeches. Every time someone wanted to explain why an institution became corrupt, they pointed to Stanford, proof that humans are wolves who only need an opportunity. But that is not what Zimbardo actually concluded, and it is not what the data actually showed. His real conclusion was more uncomfortable and more specific. The situation wasn't just powerful. The situation was a system, and the system had roles built into it. The role of guard, the role of prisoner, the role of superintendent. And once a person stepped into one of those roles, once they put on the costume, once they accepted the title, the role began to fill in the behavior. The guards didn't decide to be cruel. The role of guard in that system produced cruelty. The prisoners didn't decide to be helpless. The role of prisoner produced helplessness. And Zimbardo himself didn't decide to be a warden. The role of superintendent produced a man who told a breaking student he couldn't leave. None of them were evil. All of them were inside a machine that ran on roles. The real lesson isn't power corrupts. The real lesson is this. The system you're inside shapes what you become, usually before you even notice it's happening, and the only person who can break the spell is someone who refuses to accept the role the system is trying to hand them. In the entire Stanford experiment, only 2 people managed that. Christina Maslach, who walked in from the outside and said no, and one guard, 1 out of 12, who never crossed a line, who did his job without cruelty, who, when researchers asked him about it afterward, said that he just kept reminding himself that these were real people. He didn't need a different situation. He needed a different intention going in. Here is where the story gets strange and relevant. Zimbardo spent the rest of his career not pointing to his own experiment as proof that humans are doomed. He spent it studying the opposite. He called it heroism, specifically ordinary heroism. The decision, made by regular people with no special training, to step outside the role the system assigns and do the right thing instead. He wrote an entire book about it. He started an organization called the Heroic Imagination Project, dedicated to teaching people, teenagers, soldiers, business leaders, how to recognize the moment when the system is pulling them toward cruelty or passivity, and how to choose differently. He said the same mechanism that makes ordinary people into perpetrators also makes ordinary people into heroes. The trigger isn't who you are. The trigger is what you decide the situation is asking of you. The guard who stayed human wasn't a better person than the others. He just made a different decision about what his role required. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. You are inside systems right now. You have been handed roles at work, in your family, in your social group, online, and you accepted them without thinking about it. And those roles are filling in behavior right now, in ways you are probably not fully aware of. The Stanford experiment didn't prove that people are evil. It proved that most of us are not paying close enough attention to the systems we're inside to notice what they're making us into. The guards didn't choose to be cruel. They just never chose not to be. On August 20th, 1971, Philip Zimbardo ended the Stanford Prison Experiment. The prisoners walked out of the basement. Some of them cried. Not from relief. Several of them said they had already stopped thinking of themselves as students. They had stopped thinking of it as an experiment. They had, somewhere in those 6 days, accepted the role. It took time for some of them to come back. The guard who never crossed a line went back to his ordinary life and, by most accounts, thought about the experiment for a very long time. Christina Maslach went on to become one of the world's leading researchers on burnout, the slow collapse of identity that happens when a system demands more of you than you have left to give. And Zimbardo spent the rest of his career asking a question that his most famous experiment had never quite answered. What does it take to be the person who looks at what a system is doing and says, "No, not me, not today"? He never found a formula, but he found a pattern. The people who resisted always had the same thing in common. They had decided, before they walked in, who they were. The system couldn't hand them a role because they had already chosen one. The mice in Universe 25 had no choice. The prisoners in that basement had very little, but the guard who stayed human, he had exactly what Calhoun said we would need. A reason to be here, a role he built himself. That's the only thing the system can't take away from you, unless you let it,